It has been quite the 2 years for Florida State football, as 2 years ago Florida State had one of the best quarterbacks in college football and was on the path to the college football playoff, and then 1 year later they arguably had the worst quarterback in college football and then ended up having their worst season in nearly 50 years. Florida State's quarterback room has gotten a little bit better for 2025, and today I want to examine all the different options they have. They have a freshman who for some reason fell in the rankings but has a ton of upside, an FCS transfer who's a relative unknown, a backup who was a former blue chip who's been waiting his turn, and then a boomer bust quarterback who has a high ceiling, but most recently quit on his team after losing a starting job. Honestly, this all leads me to believe that Florida State's quarterback room is somewhat worrisome for 2025, and today we're going to talk about if that is true or not, and who I think will win the job. We'll go through all of Florida State's options, talk about who they are, how they got to this point, and then I'll tell you guys who I want to start for them. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about Florida State's quarterback room. So yeah, I've done a couple of features on teams such as Georgia, Notre Dame, North Carolina, and Auburn, so be sure to check out those down in the playlist below and let me know which team I should cover next. We do need to talk about last year's team. After losing their Heisman quarterback Jordan Travis to injury, we saw both Tate Rodemaker and Brock Glenn play at the end of the 2023 season, and neither of them were any good. Going into 2024, Jordan Travis was obviously drafted by the Jets, so they had a couple of options. You had two true freshmen in Trevor Jackson and Luke Krummenhoek, who were both blue chips. You returned Brock Glenn, and then you obviously had DJ Uiagalelei, the transfer from both Clemson and Oregon State. There was a ridiculous amount of hype for DJ, but as always, he ended up falling apart, and that led to both Glenn and Krummenhoek getting opportunities, but as we all know, Florida State was terrible, and none of them really got going. Krummenhoek ended up leaving for Mississippi State, Brock Glenn stayed home, and DJ is somehow some way on the Chargers roster right now. Now as we look forward to 2025, let's start with their first option, who's the relative unknown, in Jaylen King. Coming out of high school, King was a 4-year starter. He ended up earning first team All-Region and had nearly 3,000 yards of total offense in 3 years. This guy was not a blue chip recruit by any means though, as even though he ended up putting up good numbers, he would start out at Gardner-Webb before transferring to East Tennessee State, where he played in 10 games and threw for 1,600 yards and 9 touchdowns with 11 interceptions. Additionally, King ran for 422 yards and 5 scores. Obviously, he didn't put up great numbers at a low level, but he's seen as a dual threat player who projects as a depth piece and somebody with a lot of potential, at least somewhat. After the departure of Trevor Jackson in the transfer portal, Florida State wanted to get some more depth in the quarterback room, so they went after King. Apparently the Seminoles were a program that King always wanted to be at, and when an opportunity opened up for him in the spring portal window, he jumped on the chance. He said, quote, "I got excited because this is somewhere I always wanted to be coming out of high school, so it's full circle, and this is an opportunity for me, and it's great." Currently, he'll definitely be number 4 on the depth chart, and may have an opportunity to compete in the future, but honestly, I highly doubt it. The next guy we need to talk about is Kevin Sperry, and he's actually a very intriguing option. Originally from Torrance, California, Kevin Sperry was always a big-time athlete and loved the quarterback spot, and football ran in his blood, as his dad played linebacker at Washington State in 2002. In his first 2 years of being a starting quarterback, Sperry played at Rock Hills High School in Frisco, Texas, where he broke out as a sophomore, throwing for 1,500 yards and 9 touchdowns, with nearly 700 yards and 7 scores on the ground. He was named the Newcomer of the Year in the district. His parents always wanted to help him become a Division I prospect, so they decided they would move wherever he was going to go to college. After his stellar sophomore year at Rock Hill, he got plenty of offers, including Baylor, Texas A&M, SMU, Texas Tech, and TCU, but ultimately, he would decide to connect with Oklahoma after his relationship with Jeff Levy played a major role in his recruitment, and he chose the Sooners. They decided to move up to Oklahoma, and ended up at Carl Albert High School, which is apparently one of the most dominant schools in the area. And during that season, he had more than 3,100 yards and 42 touchdowns, and led them to a perfect 14-0 record and a state title. But before his senior season, he was on the move again, as while he was committed to Oklahoma, he followed in the footsteps of Jackson Arnold and decided to play for the prestigious Denton Guyer High School. In 2024, Sperry threw for 2,200 yards with 23 touchdowns and also ran for nearly 1,000 yards and 6 scores on the ground, but he would make a switch in terms of the school he would go to. he decided to flip to Florida State and chose them over Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and the Tennessee Volunteers. This came just a week after Tramell Jones Jr. decommitted from FSU and went to Florida, so I guess honestly it made a little bit of sense. Obviously, he was an Oklahoma commit and wanted to go there, but with all the offensive coordinator switches that kept taking place, I guess he wanted to move on. He was being recruited by Seth Luttrell, but that guy got fired too. For some reason, those scouts are not all sold on him. Sperry was a 4-star for nearly 3 years, but for some reason 24/7 Sports themselves had him listed as the number 50 quarterback in the country. But the 24/7 Sports composite had him as a 4-star, the number 27 quarterback, and the 418th best player in the class of 2025, meaning he was considered a blue chip. Truly, I have no idea. Maybe it's because he played for extremely talented high schools and had a lot of good weapons, so they thought he was inflated, but honestly, I really don't know. But in my opinion, he's definitely a 4-star. He had nearly 30 scholarship offers, and all of a sudden has made waves in spring camp for Florida State. Offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn said, quote, "For a true freshman coming in, he's been very, very impressive. I mean, he's a football guy and he's a natural." Not only has he picked up the scheme and system rather quickly, but apparently he's being seen as one of the crown jewels of Mike Norvell's 2025 class, and some believe he has a strong claim to be the backup quarterback already in 2025, and Norvell said, quote, "I don't think things are moving too fast for him in any possible way." Honestly, I think Sperry is a really solid option right now. I'd peg him as the number 2 quarterback in terms of potential, but he probably honestly won't beat out Brock Glenn, who's already started 3 games, has 2 years at Florida State under his belt, and has worked really hard and stayed consistent. We're going to talk about him now. Brock Glenn has a very interesting story, as his full name is actually Auburn Brock Glenn. I'm not even joking, as he's named after Auburn University because his grandpa went there. He was apparently very close to his grandpa growing up, and Glenn actually almost went to Auburn when they offered him. He ended up growing up in the city of Covington, Tennessee, which is about 40 minutes from Memphis. He'd always been a dual threat quarterback, as in middle school he played in the wing T offense. He had a different mindset and high expectations when he ended up in high school, and he was in an RPO system. As a freshman, he only weighed 155 pounds, but he ended up getting into the weight room with the offensive line and committed to getting better, and that's exactly what happened. By the end of his junior season, Glenn had become a 4-star prospect and a blue chip, and received offers from schools like Ohio State and all the other big SEC programs. He actually committed to the Buckeyes, and he was sandwiched between elite quarterback recruits like Kyle McCord, Devin Brown, and at the time, Dylan Raiola. It was well known that the Buckeyes were looking for a depth piece and maybe not necessarily someone to take over, and that's sort of what Brock Glenn was. At one point, he was considered a 5-star, but he ended up falling off by the end. Honestly, his numbers were never really all that spectacular, but again, it was an RPO system. In July of 2022, he eventually set a commitment date, decommitted from the Buckeyes, and considered Florida State, Ohio State, TCU, Auburn, and LSU. Over the summer, it is seen that Florida State put themselves in a great spot to land Glenn, and then combining that with Florida State's success in 2022, he ended up there. While they did enter late in the process, he had known Norvell for quite some time, as his high school coach was good friends with Mike Norvell when he was at Memphis, and would always bring his players to Norvell's camps. In total, while he was in high school, he accounted for more than 4,500 yards of offense and 68 total touchdowns during his entire career, and according to 24/7 Sports, Brock was a 4-star recruit and the number 21 quarterback in the class of 2023. So how did he do at Florida State? Well, when Glenn would enroll at Florida State, things were kind of shaky. He was actually battling a finger injury that forced him to miss most of the regular season, but then tragedy struck. Jordan Travis ended up destroying his knee against North Alabama, and then Tate Rodemaker came in. Sadly, when Florida State really needed some stability, Tate would then get hurt, and to Brock's horror, he would be thrown in to start against Louisville in the ACC championship game. While he would end up leading them to a victory, it was enough for them to get left out of the college football playoff, and then he'd make another start against Georgia in the Orange Bowl, and we all know how that game went. Glenn has had a very unique experience over his time at Florida State so far, as he appeared in 5 games, throwing for 229 yards and 1 rushing touchdown. Obviously, Glenn does not like to lose, as he was a part of this past season's 2-10 campaign, where he started 5 of the 7 games in place of DJ. He was also benched during the Duke game after having 3 turnovers, and Luke Kromenhoek would take over, but didn't look that much better. In total, his sophomore year, Glenn completed 51 passes for 597 yards and 4 touchdowns, but he had 5 picks. This was not good for him. In 3 years, he had played behind a ton of different quarterbacks, but he was still loyal to the program and did not enter the portal and trust Mike Norvell. He said, quote, "I love Florida State, I love Coach Mike Norvell, and Coach Norvell has developed a tradition here that I want to be a part of, and I think we're working on building that." So now Glenn will be entering his third year with 7 starts, and will definitely be competing for that starting job at Castellanos. But honestly, at this point, I don't know how much upside Glenn really has. He looked scared and fragile when he played in 2023, and it didn't get any better in 2024. But again, to play devil's advocate, there were no weapons, and everything at Florida State was a mess last year, so I don't know. I think Brock definitely deserves a chance to battle it out for the starting job, but if I had to guess, he's probably going to be the backup this season. No matter what though, he did not enter the portal, and he gains my respect as he wants to compete, works hard in practice, and hopefully will get an opportunity at some point. And our final player we need to talk about is Thomas Castellanos, who was brought in via the transfer portal to be the guy. Going back in time, he was one of 11 children in a single-parent household, and he was born in Miami but moved to Georgia as a toddler, and sadly his dad passed away when he was 3. His mom worked as a nurse to ensure that their kids never missed a meal, and he said, quote, "I'm very thankful for her. She's the reason why I am who I am today." And at one point, he was sort of considered the next big thing, as he started attending Waycross Middle School in Georgia and was on the 8th grade team while he was in 6th grade. He was an insane athlete, as he was seen as both the best defensive player on the football team and best offensive player in basketball, and made an insane impact. 7th grade, he was the MVP of the team and led his team to a conference championship game, and he was one of those players that high school coaches could not wait to get on their team. Smart and coachable, who also had great athletic traits. His goal going into high school was to become a Division I player and play professional football, and eventually by the time he was a junior, he blew up. He led his team to a 10-2 record, passed for 2,900 yards and 23 touchdowns, and also ran for 939 yards and 24 scores. Eventually, he started to get noticed for his ability and would get high major offers. Florida State, Georgia Tech, Kansas, Florida Atlantic, and Coastal Carolina were some of the schools that offered him coming out of high school, but UCF and Florida State were in the different tier. Florida State had a different story though, as Norvell back in time said, quote, "Thomas is somebody we recruited, and we were looking at him as a running back / athlete as he was coming out, and he's done a nice job." He was talking about how he had become at Boston College. Despite taking 2 unofficial visits to Florida State, Castellanos chose UCF because he wanted to play quarterback, and Florida State did not give him that opportunity. One scout said, quote, "There are a few signal callers that make more out of nothing than Castellanos." Why did they go to UCF? He said, quote, "It's been on my mind, and just getting the offer from Gus Malzahn, who's a big-time coach, and him liking me and wanting me to be his quarterback, that really stood out to me because knowing his history, it's great." Obviously, he was pumped to go to UCF, but he had a couple of tragedies happen. 2 days after Christmas in 2021, he tragically lost his older brother, and this was absolutely horrible. Castellanos contemplated quitting football, but the lessons his brother taught him helped him stay afloat. His brother played at Garden City Community College, and they would call late at night and help motivate each other. He didn't end up quitting, and would eventually become a star, as he had over 11,000 yards while he was in high school. According to 24/7 Sports, Castellanos was a 3-star recruit, the number 33 athlete, and the 545th best player in the class of 2022. Thomas arrived at UCF, and he was a backup quarterback, but he'd have to play a little bit towards the end of the season, as he played in the American Championship game against Tulane and ended up having 7 yards. In total, Castellanos had 1 rushing score on the ground before he would transfer to Boston College for the 2023 season. So while he was at Boston College, he'd end up taking over in 2023, as just a game into his sophomore season, he became the guy. He ended up throwing for 2,249 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 14 picks, and also rushed for over 1,100 yards and 13 scores. He became the first Boston College quarterback to pass for over 2,000 and run for over 1,000, and honestly, he was one of my favorite players going into 2024, and I thought had a lot of potential. Bill O'Brien ended up becoming the head coach this season after Jeff Hafley left for the NFL, and they ended up running different styles of offense. Bill O'Brien was more of a traditional pro-style offense, and that's more quarterback-friendly, but that quarterback who's in that system needs to play cleanly in the pocket, which is not Thomas. He sort of suffered a double whammy, as he got hurt and was benched in favor of Grayson James. Seeing how well James sparked Boston College's offense, Bill O'Brien decided to bench Thomas in favor of him, and he didn't take it well. He left the team and entered the portal in November, and finished the season with about 1,400 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 5 picks. What's interesting is when he entered the portal, Florida State knew this guy very well, as over the last 2 seasons, he had over 5 touchdowns against the Noles. Mike Norvell said some of his hairs got more gray during the time planning for him, and now he'd have him on the roster. And what's also awesome is the guy who brought him to UCF to begin with, Gus Malzahn, was now going to be his offensive coordinator. but there still are some question marks around his game. How good of a quarterback can he be? And more importantly, how good of a leader can he be? He ended up losing his starting job and quit on the team, and of course fans and coaches and pretty much anyone who's looking at this from an outsider's perspective will question this guy's leadership ability. Again, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the last time I saw this was MJ Morris at NC State, and things didn't exactly work out for him at his new school in Maryland. Who knows though? Either way, his experience, his running ability, and his ability to have that it factor is something that Florida State didn't have on their roster last year, and combining that with his relationship with Coach Malzahn makes me believe he's 100% going to be their starter this year, but still, I think this is a little bit questionable. Ultimately, Thomas will be the quarterback who trots out there week 1, Brock Glenn will probably be the steady backup, and Kevin Sperry will hopefully get a couple of looks and develop. That's how I see things playing out, but if Castellanos is a bust or he ends up quitting on the team again, then Florida State's in bad shape. I don't think Brock Glenn's ceiling is that high, and he hasn't shown that much so far, and Kevin Sperry may not necessarily be ready. While it would be cool to see that guy take over soon, he probably needs at least a year to redshirt and get better. For now, I do believe Florida State's quarterback room is a bit worrisome, but maybe I'll be wrong. But what do you guys think? If you're a Florida State fan, what do you think of their quarterback room? Who do you want to start, and which school should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.